Hello, everybody. Good morning on the West Coast. Good afternoon, good evening on the East Coast and Europe. And a very deep good evening if you happen to be listening live in Asia. Thank you for joining us. My name is Steve Fayer. I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Eightfold AI. To introduce today to talk to us about using Agile talent acquisition to transform recruiting. All right, we're starting with Lindsay.
All right, thank you, Steve. Really happy to be here. Hi, everyone on the line. I'm Amy Fiorentino. I'm a program manager on Pivotal's talent acquisition team. I've been with Pivotal for just under 4 years and really excited to talk to you all today.
Thank you so much, Steve and Lindsay. I'm also really excited to be here today. My name is Victoria Payne, and I oversee America's recruiting here at Pivotal. So this includes sourcing, university hiring, experience tech and field roles, and lots more. I've been with Pivotal since we became Pivotal back in 2013.
One more program note, if you have questions for Lindsay and Victoria as you go through, please put them in the questions window at the side of the webinar, and we will address questions at the end today.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Alrighty, so before we jump into the heart of the content today, I wanted to take a minute to set the stage and share a little bit about who Pivotal is and how Agile TA fits into that. So at Pivotal, it's our mission to transform how the world builds software. It's a very lofty mission. How do we do that? Some of the world's most established companies run on our cloud-native Pivotal platform. They use our platform and our strategic service offerings to either adopt next-generation development practices, build new applications, or modernize their existing ones. Our secret sauce, if you will, is adoption of our platform tools and methodology. And today, Lindsay and I are going to talk about how we apply that same methodology that our engineers apply to product to TA, that methodology being Agile. And so we at Pivotal, as I'm sure is the same with many of you on the phone, have had to compete with tons of extremely well-known brands in the market. And we've found that by being agile and experimenting and learning as we go, we've been able to really compete with this war on talent and meet and hiring goals and deliver an exceptional candidate experience, which, as we all know, that's really what it's all about and why we're all here today. So jumping in, just a quick overview of the agenda. I'm going to talk at a high level about our approach to people practices at Pivotal, then do a double click on Agile and share at a high level how we've applied it in the TA space in a broad sense, and then hand it over to Lindsay to give a very specific example in TA of how we applied it. Wrap up, hopefully have time for questions, and our hope is really that folks can walk away from this webinar with an understanding of how you can walk away and really try implementing a new practical Agile tactic. So starting at a high level, at Pivotal, we practice a very modern approach to people practices. We blend values, principles, and practices from these three schools of thought: lean startup, user-centered design, and Agile, to deliver an exceptional candidate and employee experience. So I'll take a minute to walk through all three quickly, and then we'll spend the rest of this webinar really getting into Agile. So lean startup is all about developing products, or for our case, programs or initiatives in an environment of constant change, which I'm sure folks on this call can certainly relate to for talent acquisition. We all operate in this ever-changing talent market, and lean startup approach is around developing that MVP, which stands for minimum viable product. What is that smallest thing that you can get out into the world, or for our case, out to your recruiting teams quickly, that will add value? Create assumptions about your product or your initiative or your program, and then test those assumptions and iterate on those learnings. So it's that constant cycle of build, measure, learn, build, measure, learn. Moving on to user-centered design, this is that philosophy that emphasizes keeping the end user centric and core. I'm sure if I could poll this audience, which I'm not going to do because Steve and I did not practice that ahead of time, but I'm sure 99.9%, maybe even 100% of TA practitioners on this call would say that they have candidate experience as a priority. And taking that user-centered design approach actually gives you the tools to really practice this. And last but not least, Agile. Agile is that set of values that create a culture where you can continuously learn and grow. And so we're going to double click on Agile and explore more deeply, what this concept is, why it's so core to how we operate and the success that it has delivered for us. And our culture at Pivotal is an Agile culture, and we do practice TA in an Agile manner as well. We're constantly deploying new strategies, learning from them, iterating on them. But I do want to just make a point of saying that if you're currently part of a company that's not an Agile software development company or culture, don't drop off right now. I think that you'll learn something from this webinar. One of the things you'll learn from this webinar is anyone can take something away from this and try something new in an Agile manner. So to further explain what Agile is, I'll start by explaining what it's not. I'm sure many of folks on this call have practiced waterfall methodologies in the HR or TA space, where you spin up a project team, plan out months and months, maybe even years of advance, and then at the end there's testing, and then you release it out to the employees or to candidates. And then by the time you release it, either the market has changed, the needs have changed, or it's just flat out just not well received. Traditional waterfall methodologies, aka what help the industrial businesses succeed, leave companies at risk in the software world. So I'll use the analogy of the Golden Gate Bridge, but waterfall is basically like building the Golden Gate Bridge. They had long planning and design loops, perfected to specifications and reams of documentation. It was built, then they went through the QA process, tests were done at the end, and finally it's released. And so that the value of the bridge actually isn't delivered until the end, once the bridge is actually complete. In a software-driven and cloud world, this approach doesn't quite fit. The longer the planning process takes, the more risk and bugs you accumulate, and the slower you go. And at times, you may have solved a problem that's actually no longer relevant, or you may have different problems today. And this is obviously a simplified approach to what waterfall is, but it brings me to a method which has grown up around software-driven development cycles called Agile Patterns. And so Agile development flips that. It's not about these huge builds and mounds of documentation and long planning cycles, but really around small batch development and taking little risks quickly so they don't mount and you can capture learnings immediately. So with QA pushed to the end of the cycle, with waterfall approach, this heightened risk for crash and burns, Agile building, testing first, early and often, and QA really built into that cycle. And the feedback is more immediate and continuous, and the findings are written into the new code or a TA initiative or project, if you will. So teams repeat these cycles of build, measure, learn, adapting continuously. And then these short feedback loops reduce the risk as they recur. So you can lower the overall risk over time. And then at the time of release, or launch, it's production ready. So at Pivotal, there are different principles or tenets of Agile. I challenge folks on the call who maybe this is new to just pick one and experiment with it. Okay, so I might have just snuck two in there since experimentation is a tenet. So that's kind of my challenge for folks on, and I think you'll see that it is something, even if you don't work in an Agile environment, it's something that we can all practice. The first tenet that I'll give a high-level overview of is transparency. Transparency really shapes the way that we communicate with each other and with our candidates and prospects, and that is just around being really open and honest. And we'll give examples of this in just a second. Continuous improvement enables us to continuously iterate on the best way to meet our candidates' needs. And then experimentation is all about trying new, innovative approaches by taking those calculated risks. You know, we aren't being reckless, rather we're being very thoughtful. Empathy, you know, simply put, it's about relating to how other folks think. And so as a TA organization, you know, we have so many stakeholders that we need to be able to relate to, candidates, prospects, technical folks, sales folks, field folks, hiring teams, operations. You know, there's a lot of different stakeholders, and we need the ability to be able to empathize and relate to them to deliver value. And then last but not least, collaboration. Collaboration is about building something with that shared ownership and purpose. You know, at Pivotal, we pair with the stakeholders I just mentioned to ensure that that end user is deeply, deeply involved from the forefront in the beginning to ensure that high adoption. And so like I mentioned, you know, any company, big or small, can really leverage this methodology in a number of different ways. You don't need to be a small startup software company. And Lindsay and I are going to share how we applied it to our TA program and initiatives. So as we develop our TA strategy and think differently, we look to the pivotal Agile methodologies. And I'm now going to talk to the 5 tenets that I just mentioned, which we apply specifically to our TA strategies, and then I'll hand it over to Lindsay to do a double click into one very specific example of how we use it to implement a new system and process. And overall, these tenets around Agile are designed to ensure that we're delivering the right experience to the right stakeholders. So starting up again with transparency. You know, one way which we embody the transparent methodology is via our job descriptions. So if folks on this call were to go onto our career site, you'll notice that a majority of our JDs are not, our job descriptions are not long laundry of requirements, nor is it solely focused on what we as the company are looking for. We really give candidates insight into the company and job from the get-go. So a majority of our job descriptions include a complete day in the life, starting with what to expect at breakfast throughout the entire day. So before a candidate even applies or even talks to a recruiter sometimes, they have some insight of what to expect. Continuous improvement. So at Pivotal, we conduct what you call retrospectives or retro. This is really about reflecting back on a period of time, a project or an initiative, to discuss what worked, what didn't work, and what can we do a better job of next time. And so it's pretty simple. You draw a smiley face on the board, so you have a happy face, a meh face, and a sad face, and you ask the group what went really well, what are you kind of still wondering about, that's the meh face, and then what did not go so well that we think we need to work on for next time. And so I think folks on this call can definitely kind of write that happy face, meh face, and sad face on the board and utilize this specific tactic. In TA, we use it, there are many different times that we use it to be agile in the TA space at Pivotal. There could be a time when we got a negative Glassdoor review about a candidate experience. Well, we'll retro the situation. Or if we have a new rec or a new hiring manager going through the process for the first time, we'll do it once the rec has closed, or after launching a new system or a program, so that we can continuously improve and continuously to learn and evolve over time. Experimentation. So this is always a fun one. While the example I'll give here is our diversity recruitment strategy. And so while we have a much broader diversity recruitment strategy, part of the strategy is understanding that there's no silver bullet here. And so we've been experimenting with different practical diversity recruitment tactics, measure the success of the tactic, and then decide if it's something that we want to expand and continue to iterate on and leverage across other parts of the business, or kill it. Empathy. So again, empathy is about putting yourself in someone else's shoes and relating to how they may be feeling, thinking, or what might resonate with that particular stakeholder. In TA space, our end users, hiring managers at Pivotal, are very data-driven. And so therefore, so are we. And we put the data in front of them that resonates. So let's take our sales space, for example. They want to look at pipeline reports and dashboards, red, yellow, green, for their sales account reviews. And they show up in the same way with TA. Speak their language, if you will. And then last but not least, collaboration. So at Pivotal, our engineers pair develop code, so our clients actually come on site and pair with our engineers and develop their solution together. And so in TA, we actually ask them to do just the same as part of their interview process. Our candidates come on site and pair and code in the AM on one project and in the afternoon on another. So really collaborating with our engineers. And the idea of a practical interview, it can be applied outside of engineering as well. Our sales folks do what we call a stand and deliver, where we simulate a real-life customer environment. I did it for scheduling roles on my team. We have folks log into our test instance of our ATS and schedule interviews. So again, it's really collaborating with the end user and practical real-life job preview of what a day in the life of that job would be. And we found that the practical interview really decreases the false positives. And so with that, I am going to hand it over to Lindsay, who is going to continue on with the tenets of Agile and share how we applied this to a very specific project.
Thanks, Victoria. So to quickly recap, Victoria has gone through what Agile is at a high level and how those 5 tenets of Agile has been adapted and applied to our TA broadly. So to double click just one more time, we thought it would be helpful to give you insight into a recent TA project that we've done and completed in an Agile manner so that you can see a practical example of the 5 tenets of Agile in play together. So what I'll be talking through is how we integrated a net new tool, Eightfold, to our tools ecosystem and how using the Agile way resulted in much higher user adoption. So what we're going to do is double click into each of these 5 tenets. So first up, we have collaboration, and collaboration is often synonymous with teamwork, which is definitely true, but here in the Agile space, you want to think about it one level deeper, such as keeping your end user in mind and partnering with key and strategic stakeholders. So if we think about it in the context of TA tool integration, such as when we implemented Eightfold to our team, these traditionally fall to the TA operations team to implement and launch, since it's naturally seen as an operationally heavy task. However, using the principles of user-centered design and Agile, you actually want to ensure you have your eventual end users involved heavily throughout the entire process. In this case, recruiters and sourcers, and not the TA ops team, were going to be our end users. So we built our system implementation project team to reflect just that. We had a mix of TA ops, recruiters, sourcers, and of course a heavy partnership with our friends at Eightfold. So by bringing in those end users, they were able to help the operational folk mold and shape the product as we went through the entire implementation process, which then resulted in a high user adoption post-go live, with 100% of license holders using the product post-launch. If we had not had that balanced project team that included the recruiters who our end users were, we may have built and released with too heavy of a focus on the operational logistics and less on the user experience itself. On the flip side, let's say the team was built entirely of just recruiters. We may have not been thinking of an end product that worked operationally across multiple systems in the existing tools ecosystem. Either of these scenarios could have led to a low adoption of the tool and perhaps no return on the investment we had made, illuminating the importance of having a really collaborative a really balanced team straight from the get-go. So if we move to experimentation, working in an agile fashion really encourages creativity, which is great. You're able to test out new ideas, experiment without high risk because you're continuously testing throughout the process and learning from those tests. So if one of your experiments comes back with poor results or one of your new ideas has poor feedback, you're able to iterate before you go too far in the wrong direction. So in the context of the systems implementation, let's say with the introduction of a new tool that affects recruiters day-to-day, such as the introduction of Eightfold, you might be met with uncertainty, skepticism, and maybe even pushback from your eventual end users who don't like or just don't want change. So this is where working in an agile way can help lessen the uncertainty and create high user adoption. In our case, we started out by getting a deep understanding of what our recruiters' current end-to-end process is. Then, since our team represented end users and operational folk, we were able to highlight areas of the process that would be changing with the introduction of this new tool. Our end users were then able to voice their concerns about any of these changes and then help shape and mold and steer the ship in a new direction while building out this end-to-end process, so that by the time go live came around, change management would be minimal. So remember that this all happened pre-launch. So continuously iterating on the end-to-end workflow before launch and pressure testing different paths meant we were able to avoid pitfalls that we might have encountered down the road. For example, while we were building out this new workflow, there were multiple times where we'd be whiteboarding out potential new end-to-end workflow ideas together as a team, and then one of our sourcers who would be an end user, they would say, this is probably really minor, but something that we were talking about just makes me think of. And then he would bring up a consideration that was far from minor, and then something we hadn't yet discussed yet. So through these workflow iteration conversations, we found ourselves engaging in really thought-provoking conversations and going down creative paths of experimentation in response to points that our team members brought up. So using that agile build, measure, learn process to create our new workflow gave us the freedom to be creative with new solutions, but in a low-risk manner. If we hadn't had those build, measure, learn workflow conversations, there's a chance we wouldn't have even bubbled up some of the key considerations vital to successful workflow, let alone have had the low-risk space to experiment with our solutions. So moving on to empathy. If you remember Victoria talking about, relating to how other people think. An important part of Agile is opening yourself up to different ideas other than your own, relating to how other people think in order to eventually create a strong end product. So in the context of this system implementation, a big goal was to launch a version of the platform that would fit the needs of our end users, so our recruiters and our sourcers, and result in a high return on our investment. So to do this, we had to think through all the different personas that our end users were. So even if they weren't represented on the project team that was focused on the implementation. For example, any geo-specific considerations of our APJ or our MIA users. To do this, we did multiple rounds of user acceptance testing and created multiple different personas to test through the lens of. For example, let's take me. I'm a US-based TA project manager, but I could go through the UAT round wearing a hat of someone who's, let's say, a London-based sourcer to see if there's any concerns that we haven't thought of yet. The impact of testing the process from different personas meant we were able to anticipate the needs of our users and customize the product prior to putting it out there, prior to launching it to our end users. So to understand the impact of utilizing empathy to mold your product or project before launch, let's just think about it like this. Imagine it's your best friend's birthday coming up. You can either A, give her a gift card to her favorite clothing store, or B, take a few minutes and think, okay, this is my best friend. I know her clothing style really well. So instead of a gift card, I can buy her a shirt from her favorite store that really reminds me of her. That extra few minutes I took to anticipate whether, what she would want could really result in that extra personal touch that would mean so much more than just the gift card. So, okay, looping it all the way back to the system integration, we wanted our end users to know that throughout the implementation process, we had their user experience at the forefront of our minds, rather than just launching the default settings or launching the settings that we thought were best. This really helps build that trust at go live and lower skepticism that you might have had otherwise at launch, leading to an easier change management and higher user adoption. So with transparency, this might sound pretty straightforward, but communicating openly and honestly at all parts of the process, though, that's something you want to remember, at all parts of the process. Often, you want to take this one step further and ensure you're thinking about all the stakeholders you need to communicate to. It's really easy to get hyper-focused on just your project team. So in the case of this project, we had to be constantly conscious of avoiding working in a silo so that all key stakeholders were involved early and often. In order to avoid working in a silo, we reached out to key stakeholders who weren't on our project team in the early phases of the project. This included, but wasn't limited to, IT, other people team directors, and of course the entire TA team. So this wouldn't be a surprise come go live. In the months leading up to the actual go live, we assessed what stakeholders needed what level of detail and when. We found it useful to build out a chart with key stakeholders groups, what dates, what info we wanted to communicate to them, so that we didn't become too hyper-focused and working within just our project team alone and forget to communicate outward. So by not working in a silo, we were able to move at a high speed and avoid bottlenecks. For example, involving IT early on is a good example of how, let's say we didn't tell them until right before launch that we had purchased a new tool. That could have definitely been a potential bottleneck. Since we looped them in as soon as the purchase was finalized, they had the entire integration process to plan for features such as whitelisting, single sign-on capability, and webhooks. That, let's say, even if some of the technical features took longer than expected or we hit some unexpected road bumps, our launch date was not affected because of how much buffer time we built in by involving them early and often. And even if the team doesn't have actual action items like IT did, for example, let's take executive staff, it's important to keep these key decision makers in the loop so that there's alignment across functions, creating an environment for change management at launch. The last tenet of this practical example is continuous improvement. So constant feedback is a cornerstone to ensuring growth. Oftentimes, unfortunately, the work doesn't stop when the project ends or when the product is released out there to your end users. With the eightfold launch, we took the lean approach of, if you remember Victoria talking about the minimum viable product, the MVP. So what that means is we took the version of the product that meets the needs of our end users with as little time and effort as possible. Now, this isn't being lazy, this is just being smart. You want to lessen your risk by launching a minimal version of the product with the intent that you will iterate and improve even after launch. So in the case of Eightfold, we determined that our TA team really wanted a tool that rediscovered candidates in the applicant tracking system we had, as well as acted as a candidate relationship management system. Since that was the need of our specific team, we chose to focus the training of the team on using those features of the platform, even though we knew the platform had other cool capabilities such as campaigns, referral management, internal mobility, the list goes on, but prioritizing what feature would be most important to our team at launch. We were able to have a higher turnaround time from purchase to go live and be able to get data that proved our ROI by focusing on what our users, what solution they'd asked for. So since we launched the subset of features, that meant, for the project team, the work didn't stop at go live. For weeks after go live, we held multiple office hours with our end users to hear directly from our users what their feedback was on their experience to help us as a project team refine our priorities and next steps on what enhancement to launch. By letting the users speak to what features they want next and having those released incrementally post-launch instead of all at once at launch, you're actually driving consistently high usage rather than just seeing a spike of high usage that first week and then seeing a drop-off. You're know that they're being listened to, and you incentivize them to use the tool if they know that their feedback is being taken seriously, right? So I've been doing a lot of talking and examples about what's happened, but what was the impact of actually using this Agile TA methodology for this eightfold implementation? A common theme in all these slides was that this Agile behavior drove high end user adoption, and that was the goal from the beginning. If you're going to invest in a new TA tool, of course you want the team to actually use it, right? So by using our Agile methodology, we successfully got that high end user adoption with 100% of all license holders using the tools in the months post-launch. We measured this and monitored this by gathering data on their account activity, such as email sent per day. Because of the success of the Agile strategy, we had high usage of the tool. And because our recruiters were reaping the benefits of Eightfold, we saw a decrease in other things such as time to hire, time it takes for candidates to get through the process, and decrease in cost per hire due to candidates being rediscovered. All right, so you may be sitting at your computer thinking, okay, this all sounds great, this all sounds fine, but how do I get started today? So if you don't remember anything about what Victoria and I have said up to this point, at least remember the takeaways on this slide. These are 4 easy things that you can take back to your company, your team, or even just a project today to start working in an agile way. Remember what Victoria said, anyone can get started today, no matter what stage you are in the agile journey. So step 1, start small. It doesn't have to be this big grand change. And remember the MVP, so define it. If you need help defining your MVP, ask yourself, what is it that my end users really need? And whether the end users are candidates, they're your employees, however that pertains to you, just really ask yourself, what is it that they need? And then ask yourself, what version of my product meets those needs with as little time and effort as possible from myself or project team? Remember, it's not being lazy, it's being smart. And speaking of the end users, keep the end user in mind throughout the entire process, not just at the beginning and not just at the end. So think candidate-centric, employee-centric with all decisions that you make. Quick tip here, if you're thinking like, how do I get to know my end user better? Explore user-centered design tools. I know we focus on Agile today, not necessarily focus on user-centered design, but explore tools such as user interviews or personas exercises to help you learn more about your end user and really, learn what are they thinking, what do they hear, what do they want. So a few more takeaways here. Remember that Agile fosters creativity, so don't be afraid to experiment with creative solutions. Just be sure to implement those continuous feedback cycles because that's how you're going to maintain that low-risk environment when being creative. That really lends itself to that build, measure, learn cycle we're talking about. You build something, you test if you're actually heading in the right direction, you learn from that feedback, and then you head right back to build to keep iterating and iterating. Lastly, communication. I cannot overemphasize communication. This is key to a lot of things in work, but definitely when working in an agile manner, you have to consciously remember to avoid working in a silo. This will help you avoid bottlenecks, create an environment for smoother change management. And to help you with this one, I think I talked about this tip a little earlier, but it might sound silly, it might sound simple, but list out the stakeholders that touch the space you're working in, and you might discover that there's some stakeholders you hadn't been thinking of. And then from there, you can map out what level of detail do they need. Do they need action items? Do they just need to be aware that something's happening? And then lastly, you can layer on what cadence should they receive information based on what level of detail they need. So that brings us right to questions. We know we've been talking a lot at you today. Victoria and Steve want to jump in any notes here, but I think we've seen some questions coming in from the audience. So
we definitely have seen questions coming in. Well, thank you, Lindsay and Victoria. That's really fascinating to hear and see what you've done. And so please, if you have other questions, please send them in. We have received several so far. Before we start asking the questions and having a discussion, one programming note for a few people who asked, we will have a recording sent out after the webinar. So if you had to step away, take a call, miss something, you'll have a chance. So I did want to ask first, one of the questions we received about experimentation. Can you provide an example of an experiment that you've tried with, the audience member asked about diversity recruitment, but if there is another example you'd like to provide, I would love to hear about an experiment.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about diversity recruitment. This is Victoria. Our vision for diversity recruitment is that, one day it's not a program or an initiative. It's just the way that we do things as part of our recruiting team at Pivotal. And so we've tried to implement very practical diversity recruitment tactics that align to their current workflow. So for example, it's every recruiter or sourcer's job to cultivate relationships with prospects. I think most folks on the call, might agree with that as well, or goal our teams on something similar. And so one of the experiments that we ran was asking each recruiter to cultivate a relationship with a minimum of, let's say, X% diverse candidates. That percentage or amount kind of needs to align to your particular hiring plans, which then resulted in a significant increase in quality diverse candidates and getting more diverse folks entered into the process at the right time. So just an example of a practical diversity recruitment tactic that we experimented with, got the team rallied around it, held the team accountable to it, and saw success with it.
Awesome. Well, that's great. I have another question. This was a little more tactical around Agile, and someone had noted that the slides, Victoria, you were presenting at the beginning, you showed the example of the Golden Gate Bridge and the waterfall method over years, and then the example of Agile with a weekly iteration. At least that's what showed up on the chart. So the question is just tactically around the Agile time period. What kind of time period are you building in for your cycles? Is it really weekly, or is it more like a month or something else? I mean, as people think about implementing this methodology themselves, what would be a good time period to think about for TA projects?
I can let Lindsay chime in. I'll give my initial thoughts. I would go as far as saying even daily. So at Pivotal, we practice something called a daily stand-up. So every office, first thing in the morning, will get together as an office and run through, any new faces to the team, any helps, any interestings, any events. And we apply and practice the same with our programs and projects in the TA or the HR space. So if you're running with a project or a program or initiative that you're looking to launch in, let's say, a month or 2 months, a daily stand-up just to get the team together on what's working, what's not working, where should we be focused, what are any of the roadblocks, what challenges are in the way, and then that weekly project meeting is something we've had success with. Anything to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. I would plus one Victoria's, daily add-on there, because something with Agile, something we've talked about, it's a high-speed type methodology, so it's not necessarily a defined timeline that you're working with. So that build, measure, learn cycle, as soon as you have, let's take that second tenet, the measure. As soon as you have measurements that's saying, giving indication that you're heading down the wrong path, learn from it, go back to the build cycle. That could be within one meeting, for example. So it could happen several times throughout a day, just depending on what context you're talking about. You can apply build, measure, learn over an entire project. You can apply it to an entire team. You can apply it to one meeting.
Yeah, and a stand-up, just to reiterate, it can be 5 minutes. It could be a half hour, but we're not talking about daily 2-hour-long meetings.
Thank goodness. I would think we all have enough meetings. 5-minute stand-ups are delightful. Well, I see we also have a question that came in just now, and this was a question we got earlier, so let me see if we can merge these. I think this is related to change management with the individual users, because your methodology involves bringing end users in early in the process. So what do you do and how do you think about it where you bring in end users and the reaction is something along the lines of, I know my job, I don't need new technology, I don't want to do anything different, I'm not going to listen to you, I'm happy with what I'm doing, and all the various ways that that you can get objections that basically are, no, I'm not going to do this, right? How do you help get end users on board? Do you think that the Agile methodology and bringing end users in at the beginning can help with that, help with the objectors or the no's in your team?
Yeah, I can kick this off and then hand it over to Lindsay. I think engaging them early and often, that way they feel a part of the solution, and that way you don't get till the end when you're launching it to learn about all their feedback. You're able to kind of hear their feedback early and often, and sometimes it might be really valid feedback, and you can take it into account and iterate from there. I think the other point I'll make is this is where you'll really want to lean on that empathy tenet to really empathize with those objectors, with those end users, and just hear their feedback, be transparent with them around what are the reasons behind it, have an open and honest and transparent dialogue, and then engage them in that journey of implementation.
Exactly, and my answers might sound similar to Victoria, which is a good thing, and we work very closely together. But yeah, definitely by bringing them in early, the point is so that they then adopt it at the end, because they are part of the build and process. They have a say in molding and shaping how whatever this process, this product, or this project is being released, because they have a stake in it. It's that analogy of personalizing the tool so that they're using it, like the gift card versus the specific gift for your friend. You are letting them into the process and letting them dictate and anticipate their needs of what they want, so that in the end they'll use it.
This is really interesting to me. I just wanted sort of quick follow-up, because so much of what we do in sales and marketing, we come back to this idea of fear and greed. If you want to convince someone to change something, you either got to make them afraid if they don't change, or show them a pot of gold for making the change. But you focused on empathy, which is really different, which is really, we're going to show you why you should trust me more than anything else. I'm curious if this idea of fear and greed, if this is something that also comes in at all in your transformation, or if this just doesn't come up at all in the way that you work with your team to get them on board.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily say it comes up because of the way the methodology is built. I think the incentive there is neither fear nor greed. It's more just incentivizing them to use the tool because they've had a stake in building it with you in this collaborative method. Yeah, so I think you get to avoid that as by using Agile methodology.
So let me switch topics here to a question about remote team members. I think this is very interesting. The question is, does this methodology work as well with people who are not physically in the same location? We all work with remote teams today. How do you bring remote team members in with the methodology that can involve daily scrums and this type of intensive feedback cycles?
Yep, absolutely. So, this is Lindsay, and I was going to talk through the Eightfold System implementation practical example. So, something there, our entire project team was remote. None of us were physically co-located in the same office. So we were able to do that example we talked through physically not in the same location, because we leaned on collaboration tools such as, I don't know if your company has video conferencing tools. That's definitely something to lean on just to do a quick stand-up. I know one of the key takeaways at the end, I was talking about communication. So there's never too much over-communication, especially when you're not, when you're all a remote team. So there's also other collaboration tools that are free to use out there, such as Miro. That's what we use to build out the workflow and iterate on it together. So definitely just making use of collaboration tools that are making sure that you're communicating, even if you feel like you're over-communicating, are ways to still move at that high speed and use Agile methodology successfully, even if you're not all in the same place.
Yeah, and our whole team is distributed. Lindsay and I are sitting here together today, but a majority of the team is distributed across the world, and those daily stand-up Zoom calls really help with that collaboration.
All right. I have a question here around measures of success. Does the Agile methodology change how you measure success or set expectations for TA broadly? I think that the questioner is not just asking about the success of the program that you're launching with Agile, but more how it affects the way that you think about the work of your recruiting team generally.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, this is a good question. Thanks for asking it, whoever did. I think what we walked through today is a lot of the how we expect and set expectations with our teams of how they will then accomplish the metrics, which are the what. So, we goal our teams on, time it takes a candidate to get through the process and positions filled, and I'm sure a lot of metrics that resonate with folks on the phone. What we just walked through today was really around the cultural expectations of how we and I expect our teams to operate and interact with each other.
All right. I think we have exhausted the audience questions. We'll take another couple of seconds here. If you, anyone else would like to ask a question, please jump them in right now. Yeah, all right. Any closing thoughts then, Lindsay, Victoria?
No, I think we covered a lot today. Thank you so much for having us. It's always great to get to share all the great work that we're passionate about and hopefully help to enable others to embark on this journey of Agile. I do think there was maybe one last question in there around, how for folks that are, not comfortable with this type of methodology and are coming from more of that maybe legacy big company, how do you kind of overcome that with them? And I would say, you don't have to roll out some big Agile HR, Agile TA, PMO. You can start really small. Just start with, like I said, challenge all of you to start with one of those tenets and experiment with one thing that you're going to try differently and be more agile about. And I think you'll see that you'll gain smaller successes, bigger successes in a shorter period of time, and then you'll be able to continue to iterate from there. So just thank you so much for having us, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Well, thank you for joining the webinar today. Got some great comments coming in. We know that the group appreciated it, and thank you all for joining on the phone and on your computer. A recording of the webinar will be made available following today's event, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Eightfold webinar. For those in the United States, have a happy Thanksgiving week as well. Bye-bye, everyone.